Aloha aina, ano ai, Melina Kako. Welcome to Free Hawaii News, brought to you by the Kiwani Foundation, presenting Hawaiian perspectives on a broad range of topics and issues affecting the Hawaiian Islands, the Pacific, and the world. Your hosts for Free Hawaii News are Leon Kaulahau-Siu, musician, composer, diplomat, and political analyst, and Hinaleimoana Wong, Kumu filmmaker, cultural and Hawaiian language preservationist, and community leader. And now, Free Hawaii News.
Ano ai me ke aloha ia kākoa pauloa e ko Hawaii nei pai aina puni. Mahalo anui ke hui ana o wau no ke ia o Kumuhina.
And my name is Leon Kaulahau-Siu, and we welcome you to this episode of Free Hawaii News. Te Tiriti o Waitangi, or the Treaty of Waitangi of 1840, ended the wars between the Māori tribes and the British settlers. It affirmed independence and rights of the Māori people, the indigenous people of Aotearoa, or what Westerners call New Zealand. These include land and water rights, as well as all that is held sacred by the Māori. However, the treaty, a legal document, was written in both English and Māori without accounting for the differences in the meaning of certain key words. Thus, the history of Aotearoa since 1840 has been marked by repeated failures by the Crown, the British government, to honor the founding promises as understood by the Māori. Queen Elizabeth traveled to Waitangi and apologized through the Māori for the serious wrongs committed by the government due to the misinterpretations between the English and Māori versions of the treaty. The government of New Zealand soon returned tens of thousands of acres to the Tainui tribe and set up a mechanism called the Waitangi Tribunal to hear the cases of individual tribes. Thus far, millions of acres have been returned to dozens of tribes in Aotearoa, much of those lands in rural areas, but some of the lands include large areas of the city of Auckland, other cities, harbors, ports, and military bases across New Zealand. Te Tiriti o Waitangi and the Waitangi Tribunal became an inspiration to indigenous peoples everywhere, raising hopes that long-time injustices and plundering of indigenous lands can perhaps be corrected. However, since coming to power in 2023, the current government of New Zealand passed laws directly attacking the Maori's rights to their land, their language, culture, and health care. For Maori, the Treaty of Waitangi is a reaffirmation of rights that already existed because they are tangata whenua, or the people of the land. Because this is somewhat similar to what has happened to Kanaka Maoli and their rights here in Hawaii, a delegation of Kanaka Maoli, or Hawaiians, who are members of a Kalahui Hawaii, traveled to Aotearoa to stand in solidarity with the Maori there. For more, we go now to Aotearoa, where Healani Sonora Pali of Kalahui is standing by. Aloha, Healani.
Aloha, Leon. Good to see you again. I'm here in Waitangi in Aotearoa.
Explain to our viewers what the Treaty of Waitangi is and why it's so critically important for the Maori in Aotearoa.
Te Tiriti o Waitangi was a treaty that was signed between the British government and the chiefs of the Māori people in 1840 here in Waitangi. And it is important founding government document of quote unquote New Zealand. And every year they come here and gather at Waitangi to commemorate this signing.
Tell us why members of Kalahui felt it was important to go as a delegation to Aotearoa.
Kalahui, Hawaii, we brought 17 delegates to Waitangi Day this year in 2026. Waitangi Day is celebrated on February 6th every year, and that was to commemorate the signing of the Waitangi Treaty. we thought it was important to stand in solidarity with the Māori people, who are our cousins from way back.
How are the Maori people doing presently?
The Māori people are standing together against this oppression that they're facing by their right-wing parliament. Their parliament is controlled by a coalition of right-wing groups, parties, and they're standing strong against them. They're fighting, they're resisting. And there's thousands of people here in Waitangi Day, thousands of Māoris. Waitangi, the remembrance, this whole event is days long. And I've seen some incredible speeches done by the Māori people, beautiful speeches, actions. We had a hikoi today. There were dozens of waka or canoes that came in to assert their right to be here as Indigenous peoples, the first people of Aotearoa, the people of the land. So they're standing strong against this conservative movement. And I think our youth that we brought with us has learned a lot and has found strength from them. And we hope we were able to lend some of our strength and give them some of our mana.
Explain what tikanga Māori is, why it's considered the first law of the land even today.
Māori here, they're divided by iwi and hapu, and they have different groups of Māori in different districts. They're governed by their own system of laws and values. And these values are very much tied into this place that they live in and their culture and their history. Similar to Hawaiians, we are governed by we govern each other with our shared values. And so the Māori are very warlike, in my perspective, more so than Kanaka, although we did kill Captain Cook. But they are more warlike, and so their values is what is really what they lean on, from my perspective. And I'm not speaking for them, but from my observation, that is the Māoris are very much similar to Hawaiians in that they have a shared culture, and and their culture is very much alive. So is their language. And many of them still live on their own land, even though most of their land was stolen by the British government. So they're the people of the land. And so they're very much tied to nature, to their environment, to each other, and to Oceania. And we feel very connected here in Hawaii with them. We feel a lot of our values are their values as well.
What is happening there with regards to Maori land rights?
What's happening with the right-wing government is they're trying to reinterpret or rewrite history and rewrite what Te Tiriti o Waitangi really says and means. And again, under the guise of equality for all, settlers are asserting themselves here in Aotearoa as the real people of this land. So their land rights, the treaty promised them millions of acres. They only got a few thousand, from my understanding. And so they're in a similar situation as Kanaka. They're fighting for their land back. And they're fighting for their right to protect their land and their sacred places here in Hawaii, up here in Aotearoa. So we are in similar situations. Right now, we have an attack on Hawaiian education going on in Hawaii. Here in Aotearoa, it's an attack pretty much on their existence. and their status as indigenous peoples in their own homeland. And that is because of the way they're reinterpreting the principles of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. They're going with the English version, which was very different from the Māori version. The Māori version, which was the version that was signed by the chiefs, the Māori chiefs. The English version was signed by a handful of white men. So that is what's going on here. They're in a similar situation. They have a treaty, but a little different, right? They have a treaty, but we don't. There is no treaty of annexation. And so we're dealing with that whole falsehood. And here they're dealing with the interpretation of that treaty.
Hialani, what about issues such as Māori language and culture?
They have, their culture and language is very strong from my observation. And of course, we all know that it was the Māori kaupapa, kula kaupapa, the Māori immersion schools that really inspired our educators to start our Hawaiian immersion schools in Hawaii. And so we've heard a lot of Māori language here. Their language and culture is very strong. I don't know, in 3 years, from my understanding, the parliament, this conservative parliament, has pulled back a lot of programs and support for Māoris. So they're in that whole struggle with this government. They've been in power for 3 years.
What position is Kalahui Hawaii taking to protecting Māori rights in Aotearoa?
Kalahui Hawaii is standing with the Māori people. We are standing here and telling the world, please pay attention to what's happening here. Because it's happening all over the Pacific. It's happening all over Oceania. They're going to come after whatever's left that indigenous peoples have. And it's like the last push.
What are the takeaways for Kanaka Maoli here in Hawaii?
We are connected genealogically, culturally, and the ocean connects us. We have that same origin from Moananui, Okanaloa. So we all have the same origins. And I think that was a huge takeaway. But that we also have the same struggle. We have the struggle to survive. This is an attack against not just Māoris, but it's an attack on Kanaka and all indigenous peoples of Oceania that's happening.
Mahalo nui Hialani Sonora Pali for your mana'o.
We have arrived now at the part of our show where we get to talk to you, our audience, about the Pacific Way. And today, Leon and I would like to discuss what is it that we feel is reflective of Pacific Island leadership. Leon, what are your thoughts on the topic of what constitutes Pacific Island leadership?
Well, this is really something near and dear to me because I've been thinking about it for a long time. And particularly when we use the example of the comparison between the European and Asian model of leadership among their monarchs, for instance, and the Hawaiian monarchs. Although they kind of resemble each other, they were totally different. The European monarchs were actually quite selfish, and of course land grubbing or land taking, and basically everything was for their own gain, and they paid no attention to the servants or to the serfs and all those under them. Basically, they were just used for the monarch's own pleasure.
Yes.
In Hawaii, it was totally different.
Absolutely.
The monarchs had this huge feeling of responsibility, kuleana, and aloha for their people, and they strove, particularly the monarchs of Hawaii in the 19th century, strove to serve the people, keeping their welfare in mind at first. So that's where I see a huge contrast between the Western way and the Hawaiian way or Pacific way.
Absolutely. And if we look into our own history, we see several good examples of what happens when chiefly leadership is oppressive. when chiefly leadership takes more than it ensures to give. In contrast to Pacific leadership, we know that European-oriented or European-centric leadership had that feudal system where serfs and the lower classes were tied to the land, and they were lucky to receive what little breadcrumbs that they got. However, in Pacific leadership, it is the chiefly duty, the ideal chief ensures that not only are the lands flowing, productive to their fullest capacity, but also that affairs of the government, which include the religious practices of the island community. And it was because religious practices were tied to ensuring that prayers for the land, prayers for fruitful growing of food crops, that they were maintained. It was to ensure that the cycle of life and the relationship between man and the natural environment was supplanted by prayers that honored this understanding, honoring this relationship. And so when the responsibility of a traditional chief is to make sure that everybody is well cared for, there's only one word that we can sum up, and that is the word we all understand, which is aloha. Now, interestingly, aloha is something that we find throughout the Pacific, at least amongst the islands of the Moana Nui, that are familiar with the term moana. Some people will know this as the Polynesian islands. Aloha, aroa, ofa or alofa, alofa, and the different ways that this word is pronounced. You know, the subtle differences that each island observes as their dialect. But aloha, at the end of the day, aloha doesn't know color. Aloha doesn't know, well, of course, in traditional times, you don't have a capitalist system. Aloha is that kindness, it is that respect. And so it is a very challenging thing in this modern time, in 2026, when we see that our Pacific Island people have really gravitated away for some strange reason and followed leadership, political leadership, that does not reflect anything consistent with who we are as Pacific people. Don't you think so?
Yes, very much so. And this aloha for the land, of course, is in quite a bit in contrast to the Western European view, where land became a commodity and a place of ownership and a place to exploit rather than to really just survive and to support life. And when that culture began to move into being colonial culture, they took that mindset with them, and they started to see land again as something to extract wealth from, and as commodities. They didn't care who lived on it as long as they could get the whatever they were after, and if people were in the way, then they were just brushed aside or run over.
Yes.
And no regard to the land. It was just something to use, and when they were pound with it, then they moved on.
Yes.
You know, and so so this is a big contrast about that relational, that aloha for that extends aloha aina to the land and the whole environment that supports life. So I see that also, that this is something crucial that we need as we move toward becoming again an independent nation. We need to be cultivating this in our people. Many of our people have been westernized to the degree that they don't really understand this.
Yes.
They still have a Western vision of life.
Yes.
And so we need to be able to cultivate this and bring this back. Hawaii is a good place to start. Of course, you look in the Pacific Islands, most of them are already there. They never left that.
Yes.
And I remember having a discussion one time with the former president of the Marshall Islands. He was appalled by the fact that we don't control our own lands.
Yes.
He couldn't understand. He said, well, why don't you simply demand it back? And I said, well, it's not that simple, but he was basically saying, this is a tragedy that you're separated from your lands.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is a tragedy, and specifically in our cultural understanding, one of the main primary tenets of who we are being tied to the land is that the land is our mother.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're familiar with the story of Papa and Wakea. I believe we mentioned this in another show, Papa, Wakea, and the story of Haloa. Now, Papa Hanaumoku, she is also known or associated with another name, and his name is Haumea. And Haumea, very specifically, is a name associated with childbirth. And so when we look back in our tradition, the primary deities are parental figures. Now, elsewhere in our tradition and our history, we have chiefs. Halaea, Ko'ihala, Kohai Kalani. They were oppressive chiefs of Ka'u. Another oppressive chief from the island of Hawaii was Hakau. And these chiefs were unkind to the people. They demanded above and beyond what would have been necessary, and they were selfish. Selfish versus selfless. Pacific Island Way, based on the collective, is being selfless. Capitalist way and individual personal freedoms and liberties are so very attuned to selfish, self-serving. And I think it's extremely important as our people aspire to really look at who we are and who we were meant to be. Our people must remember this.
You're watching Free Hawaii News, giving you the Kanaka perspective on issues in Hawaii.
One of the unpleasant realities that we as Kanaka Maoli face today is that more of us now live outside of Hawaii than in it. For many Kanaka, leaving Hawaii is not a choice, but a contentious survival strategy due to skyrocketing living costs and lack of affordable housing. One of the places that many Hawaiians have relocated to is Nevada and Las Vegas in particular. As a result, we often hear Las Vegas being referred to as the ninth island. Yet, as indigenous people, we Kanaka Maoli must wake up to the fact that Las Vegas is in fact not our ninth island at all because of one simple fact. Las Vegas is actually the home of the Nuwuvi, the indigenous people of the southern Paiute. So, how should we as Hawaiians properly relate to Las Vegas and the indigenous people of that land? For those answers and more, we go now to Adam Kiave Manalo Camp, a Kanaka who researches and writes about history, culture, economics, and social issues from a Hawaiian point of view. Aloha mai kaua, Adam Kiave.
Aloha again, Kumu.
Adam Kiave ke olu olu. Tell us about the Nuwuvi, the southern Paiute people whose land Las Vegas occupies, whom their ancestors were, and the struggles they experienced in their homeland in the past.
Las Vegas sits on Nuwuvi homelands. The Nuwuvi are the southern Paiute people whose homeland spans what is now southern Nevada, Utah, Arizona, and California. But before Las Vegas was casinos, this valley was springs. Water made life in this desert possible. The Nuwuvi developed a complex knowledge system of desert watersheds, seasonal mobility patterns, and kinship networks that were rooted in this place specifically. The name Las Vegas, by the way, comes from the Spanish meaning the plains because of the water springs and the flatlands within the valley itself. Now, going back to the Nuwuvi, their struggles are historically layered. Their history includes land dispossession after the U.S. took over Nevada as a result of the Mexican-American War and the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. The Nuwuvi were not consulted, of course. Later on, this land was claimed by the Mormons, who established a long-term non-indigenous settlement. From there was a century of cultural suppression through federal assimilation policies and the Indian reservation school system and a cession treaty.
The Nuwuvi experienced violent dispossession of their own homeland by foreign settlers, just as we did here in Hawaii. Yes?
Yes. So in some ways, very similar. In 1848, there was the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which transferred vast Mexican territories, including present-day Nevada, into U.S. control. That transfer accelerated American expansion into indigenous lands across the entire Southwest region and led to violent clashes between white settlers and indigenous peoples. In 1855, Mormon settlers established the old Las Vegas Mormon Fort at the Springs. This was the first permanent non-native settlement in the Las Vegas Valley. The Nevada State Parks identifies this fort as foundational to the establishment of Las Vegas itself. The Mormons, they took control of the water by establishing the fort, and this helped to normalize the occupation of this valley as well as to promote missionary work. That too is often how settler colonialism has taken root in Hawaii, the Pacific, and in Turtle Island itself. Then, in 1874, there was Cession Treaty 558, which confiscated the entirety of the Paiute homeland, including what is now Las Vegas. So they became a landless people, and they were forced to work on farms and ranches of the settlers. By 1911, a 10-acre parcel was deeded by a wealthy settler to create what is now called the Las Vegas Paiute Colony, or Las Vegas Indian Colony. 10 acres in the center of one's homeland is not generosity. It is a visible outcome of dispossession. Eventually, Snow Mountain was returned to the Nuwuvi by the federal government after years of lobbying. So, yes, there were violent dispossession. Violent dispossession is an accurate term. It's not rhetoric, it is based on historical facts.
There are many similarities to what the Nuwuvi went through, including the pain of not only the erasure of their language and culture, but the risk of literal erasure of themselves, just as we have in Hawaii. Would you say yes?
Yes, and it is important to be precise. The United States implemented boarding school policies designed to assimilate indigenous children and suppress their language, their culture, and their governance systems. The federal Indian boarding school system is documented by the United States Department of the Interior for its century of systematic abuse, which includes mental, physical, health, and sexual. In Nevada, institutions such as the Stewart Indian School were part of that broader assimilation framework. These were not accidental harms. These were policies. These were systematic. Children were removed and taught to be good Americans by erasing anything indigenous within themselves. So when we're speaking about erasure, we are speaking about state-sponsored disruption of cultural continuity across generations. We are talking about cultural genocide. Hawaiians, we recognize that pattern.
So if we as Hawaiians refer to the land of the Nuwuvi as our ninth island, are we not guilty of acting like settlers ourselves? And really, shouldn't we know better?
We have to hold complexity without defensiveness. So Kanaka Maoli migration or diaspora to Las Vegas is shaped largely by our economic displacement in Hawaii. Many families come here to survive. Some families come here because of medical, some for other reasons. But this is real. The displacement is real. They've built a community, and in some ways, to ease the pain of displacement from our homeland, the term the Ninth Island was created to show that Kanaka Maoli and former Hawaii residents in Las Vegas still felt pilina, or connection to Hawaii and to our culture. The older generation in particular has a deep attachment to that term, the Ninth Island. But language still matters. Ninth Island can imply possession and can in many ways continue the erasure of the Nuwuvi people as well as other indigenous peoples around this land. It can also subtly erase the fact that this is Nuwuvi land. If we know what possession feels like, and we do as Kanaka Maoli, then we should be disciplined about not reproducing settler habits in our own speech.
Is it possible for we as Kanaka Maoli to ethically and responsibly live on Nuwuvi land, which today is called Las Vegas? And if so, how do we do that?
Yes, but ethics must be practiced and not merely declared. So first, we got to name the people who are indigenous to this land, the Nuwuvi, and we need to acknowledge that they still are here and that this is still their land. Second, we need to teach the local settler history honestly. The old Mormon fort at the Springs in 1855 is not some sort of trivia point. It is the beginning of permanent non-native settlement in the valley. Third, we need to understand the legal context. So there's the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which is a turning point in U.S. expansion into this region, but it also marked the beginning of Manifest Destiny that entered into the Pacific, including our homeland, Hawaii. Fourth, you have to move away from symbolic acknowledgement to material reciprocity. We need to build relationships with the Las Vegas Paiute community. We need to learn the names for the geography of this area as well. So we need to think of ourselves as guests, not as extensions of empire.
How can we begin to move past the Ninth Island moniker and shift our collective consciousness so that we can conduct ourselves in a pono way to respect the Nuwuvi people, their history, culture, and their land?
Yes, indeed. So the shift has to come with intellectual honesty. We need to replace the language of ownership with pilina. We need to say our Hawaiian community on Nuwuvi homelands. And we need to remember the dates. 1848, Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. 1855, Old Mormon Fort at the Springs Preserves. 1874, Session Treaty 558, dispossessing the Nuwuvi of their land. 1911, the 10-acre Paiute colony. 1983, Snow Mountain Reservation was enacted to return the Nuwuvi more of their ancestral homeland. So we need to remember these dates. We need to hold space for solidarity with other marginalized peoples, including our indigenous cousins on Turtle Island. And we need to decolonize ourselves wherever we are.
No leila, mahalo anui ia oi Adam Kiawe no kou manawa, mahalo anui kou hoʻokupaʻa, mahalo anui ke ihui ana. Aloha.
40 years ago, when we started what became the effort to restore Hawaii as an independent nation, our prospects looked very bleak. Yes, we learned about all the illegal actions by the United States that led to our current situation. And over the years, Hawaiian scholars gathered volumes of irrefutable evidence proving many times over that indeed the Bayonet Constitution, the overthrow, the annexation, statehood, the dispossession of lands were all illegal acts, and therefore the U.S. claim to dominion over Hawaii is unlawful and invalid. And yet, here we are, still captive in our own lands, even after the 1993 U.S. apology fully admitting to the initial wrongful act, the landing of armed U.S. troops to unseat the government of a friendly nation, causing the destruction of the Hawaiian nation and regime changes, conveniently leading to an unlawful annexation and an unlawful absorption into the American Union of States. Our understanding of how this all played out has improved, but still there has been no remedy. In 2010, Kaiopua Fife, Pokalai Nui, and I were at the United Nations in Geneva attending a side event at the UN Human Rights Council. At that session of the Human Rights Council, the United States was going through what is called a Universal Periodic Review. This is a review that each member country of the UN goes through every 5 years. It is a review of each country's human rights record and policies. At the U.S. side event, Pokalai Nui was called on to ask a question of the U.S. diplomatic team. He asked the U.S. attorney on the panel, "Could you explain by what lawful means the United States acquired the Hawaiian Islands?" The U.S. attorney got visibly flustered and after some awkward moments finally said, "This is not a legal question. It's a political question, and the political question has been settled. Next," and they moved on. Wow, this was unexpected. What did he mean by "this is not a legal question, it's a political question, and the political question has been settled"? It took us several years to figure out what the U.S. State Department attorney meant, and it came to we were asking the wrong questions. We were asking legal questions and getting blocked and frustrated by courts simply dismissing cases. When studying different cases, if the judge provided a reason for dismissal, we would find the judge saying, "This is not a legal question." Sometimes they would also say, "This is a political question." So we shifted to trying to figure out the right questions to ask.
You're watching Free Hawaii News, giving you the Kanaka perspective on issues in Hawaii.
For decades, many have spoken and written about the negative impact tourism has had on Hawaii. Those of us who live in Hawaii feel it every day. Ever since the Lahaina fire, Hawaii politicians and others have talked about a new beginning for tourism, and yet, for all the talk, it seems like nothing has changed. One of those here in Hawaii who has been an advocate for alternative models of tourism is Ramsey Tom, who is the director of the Pacific Island Leadership Institute at Hawaii Pacific University. He is a respected cultural practitioner and instructor of several Native Hawaiian practices, including Ho'oponopono and Lua. Ramsey Tom is a sought-after cultural resource keynote speaker, lecturer, trainer, and facilitator. He has been especially effective working with Hawaii's travel, leisure, and retail industries, where he has advocated for integration of place-based and cultural-based values in the visitor industry. Aloha, Ramsey.
Aloha, Leon.
Ramsey, it's now 2026, and here we are still grappling with the ongoing negative impacts of tourism in Hawaii. Would you briefly describe those negative impacts of tourism that you believe need to be addressed?
It really depends on who you talk to, but I think there have been surveys and we can talk to our community. But some of the impacts and things that keep coming up to the surface are cost of living, environmental degradation, what's happening to our place around us. The respect or the disrespect of our community, our culture, and the way we are. Then there's, of course, the physical impacts of just overcrowding. How many people, 12 million people, really? And how many feet are on the ground every day on top of the current population? As a result of that, of course, then it's a strain on our resources, our water, our lands, etc. I think those tend to be the things that surface to the top. But what I don't think we hear people talking enough about the impact is on the soul and the spirit of the place. and our relationship to it ourselves, and yes, even to our visitors, those that come here to visit with, whether family or friends. To be a good host, to be a happy host, to be a content host, not a servant. I think that depends and relies heavily on our own relationship with the place. So I think that's an impact that we don't talk about or recognize in many of our conversations. That is definitely a negative impact. And the idea that we are of this place, not just from this place, and that we can actually share our place and welcome people. All these other things, these are transactional questions that we get on a survey, in many ways put together by the visitor industry and the support system around it. But what is the community? What is the community impact? Which I think still gets hidden when we just focus on these levels of question. Once we deal with that, then I think these other impacts might be addressed in a different way.
Could you describe what you believe would need to be done to correct those negative impacts?
I think it's shifting the concept and principle. And again, we've talked about this before. The host, who is really the host? Is it an industry? Is it the state? Or is it the lahui? Or is it the aina that is actually hosting a visitor whom we call a tourist? And I think the definition there is important as well. We've talked about it before, that a tourist tends to be someone that looks from the outside in, takes photos, doesn't really engage, really doesn't have any accountability. Whereas a visitor, hopefully they're engaging us, our place, and have a sense of connectivity, connection, ohana, that they can take some responsibility for their behavior, their actions, and their relationships. And not just take from the place, but actually contribute and give to the place. So until we can shift that notion that we're not a place to come to and take from, but we are coming to the homes of others who are living there, and our experience as a visitor is enhanced and improved because of the relationships that we have with those people, as well as the place they were in. Because until that happens, we're going to continue to see the degradation in the community because, or not just the community, but the land, because they don't have a connection to it. They don't have any sense of responsibility or accountability. They can throw their trash and they can leave. Somebody will clean it up if someone cleans it up at all. So again, the impacts that we identified earlier that continue to be identified by the industry are all connected, I think, back to our relationships with these things. I have a better respect for your culture when I understand the culture, when I'm engaged in it, not as a performance, but living it. It's until the visitor lives that with us and we can actually engage in that rather than it being performed by someone that's not living it, which is the case with many people performing it but don't really live it. So consequently, how do you respect something that you are not engaged with it, right? This is the difference between a reverence and a reference. You can refer to the culture, but you have no reverence for it because it's not a part of you. It's not engaged. You're not being held accountable. And you have no sense of kuleana, as we say, no responsibility to it. So I think that's one of the things that needs to shift before we can even begin to address some of the other stuff. How do we define tourism? Who is the host? And really, what is the outcome? What is the intention of it? Is it intended just for people to come and visit, take something away, feed a hotel organization or an airline? I think it's got to be more than that. And I think when we enter that space and have that conversation, I think we begin to start looking at solutions to these other problems.
In the last few years since the Maui fires, we have heard talk about a new beginning for a redesigned tourism, but it seems like there has been no fundamental change. What do you think would be a tipping point for tourism?
The definition of tourism versus a community that welcomes visitors, welcomes guests. hospitality. When we use the term hospitality, but really what we're saying is how do you treat the tourist? Definitions matter. And the tragedy that we experienced, I say we as a larger community in Lahaina, is simply revealing again that deep disconnect. And any conversation about redeveloping tourism without the conversation of redeveloping and reviving community first, I think is missing the point. So we're not a tourism destination with a community living in it any more than, the temple has a community that comes to it. It's not a temple in the community. Until we have that conversation, or really that reality, that visitors are coming to a destination, a place that is lived in. So the Lahaina experience, and any experience of rebuilding in the future, should actually start about the community. How do we redesign the Lahaina community? How do we revive it, restore it, to get it to a point of thriving and not just surviving on tourism? That's a real important conversation to have, because otherwise we're stuck in the old paradigm. How do we redevelop a tourism economy? And then what does a community look like that does that? The beneficiary in that conversation is tourism rather than the other way around. And again, it's not just tourism, it's any economy-based development plan that is imposed upon, and or maybe the word is inappropriate, but predates on that community under the auspices of serving that community. And again, it's not an indictment, it's an observation.
Describe the challenges we are facing with coming up with a better vision for tourism for Hawaii.
Vision is an important concept. I think in our conversations in the past, I told you I had to lose my sight to gain my vision. If we keep looking at it the way we've been looking at it, in the absence of a true vision of what it looks like in the future, then I think we get stuck in the incrementalism, and we were talking about this earlier, the notion of a curse of knowledge. What we know is what we end up trying to restore or rebuild. And so the challenge is getting out of that. Anytime you use the term rebuild or restore, you're using the past to begin to frame the future, rather than the other way around, which we tend to call backcasting. Looking into the future with a true vision of what could be here, not just rebuilding what was here. And so in the case of Lahaina, and I think that the Pai'aina at large, is that what are the ingredients of that future? Is it an ingredient that says we eat from the land, we drink from the water, we actually have freedom to move about in our communities? In the absence of those particular metrics, we start saying, well, how do we park cars? How do I get the tourists to the hotel? Those aren't community-driven questions. These are industry-related questions. And so again, it's all intertwined at where you start the conversation, as we say, start right, end right. So if we start the conversation and the discussion at what benefits the industry, the tourist, and the visitor, then whatever happens to the resident is going to be an afterthought. And I think that's what communities are feeling, that no one's really looking after us because we are after everything else, if that makes any sense. But I think that's the track that we need to shift, is that until it is place-based, until it starts with us working out, we are the outsiders from the inside. We're looking in as outsiders.
How can we better educate those in the visitor industry about Hawaii's real history and the real issues that tourism causes our residents?
I think that's a perpetual problem when it comes to education of any kind, especially with its history. By definition, it's looking back. And unfortunately, we have a disconnect of what's behind us and its connection to what's in front of us. So the history of our kingdom, the history of the kingdom as a independent state, is disconnected from the current condition and where we're going of wanting to restore and be in that place again. So it's a much broader conversation that if the visitor industry wants to point to a royal history, unlike the living history of the royals in England, we're just benefiting from an ancient memory as far as these people are concerned that has no connection to the current condition, let alone to the future condition. So until we can bridge the history to the future, then we're just creating an academic opportunity to play old music with a new radio. How do we get the future? Vision has to do with future. A memory has to do with the past. So if that's the case, how do we remember a future that we can be proud of and that we can look back to when we've passed that and to say, wow, look at where we've come as a result of shifting our sails, as one kupuna would say, adjusting our sails and following the winds and currents in a different way. But right now, the wind and current is still relying on sails that are guided and directed to a historical development past. Short end, I think we have to connect the future to the past, and as a lahui, begin to remember who we really are. Who are we? We weren't just those people. We weren't just a kingdom. We weren't just an independent state. We weren't just those individuals who could feed ourselves and take, but we are and can be that again. And any industry, whatever that might be, tourism or otherwise, should be a part of that fabric of how we do that. We should not be an afterthought. We should not be a benefit of their or that business model. It should be an outcome. It should be an extension of who we are as a place and as a people. That requires us to shift even our relationship to our history, and not a victim's approach, but really one that says we're still here, we've survived, and more so, we may be better for it. We just need to take the step to realize that.
Mahalo nui loa, Ramsey. Mahalo for joining us and for sharing your mana'o.
Next on Free Hawaii News, Kumu Hina's mana'o.
Mahalo anu ia oko e ke anaina no ke ia launa ana ma ke ia manawa no ko kumuhina manao. Ai loko no hoi ke ia manawa pokole, mama ke no au e kukala kui kuumau manao e pili ana no ia mea o ia no o ko olelo Hawaii. I ke la mahina kunei wa malama ia ka mahina ho mai kai ka mahina pai pai I ka olelo makuahine o ka aina nei. In short, the translation to what I just said could be summed up as that last month we observed Hawaiian Language Month. And my thoughts in particular about bringing this topic forward for you in Kumuhina's Mana'o is that some people that I've come across have inspired me to think about what is the real place of language in our daily lives. And perhaps some would look at this from a more decorative and a more a way of being sort of a front or a facade. However, when we really think about what does language mean, our language, not unlike any other language around the world, our language would reveal to us the attitudes, the perspectives, the worldview, and the philosophy of how we see the world and our lives within it. And so when we think about things like somebody coming to our house, it's understood. Ehele mai, mai ai, noho mai, paina, noho mai ai. We welcome people in. We offer something to drink, something to eat. We demonstrate that there is hospitality in the house. when we are passing by people on the road, aloha, ai aloha, e mahalo. These things are basic understandings of people whom perhaps almost now completely disappeared off the face of our islands. And these would be the Manaleo, the native speakers of our language. They are a different type of Hawaiian speaker, and that is because there are some inborn, ingrained understandings that come with Hawaiian language. And we start off with words like aloha. Aloha requires us to consider that it is not hello and goodbye only. It is also love, but it is also understanding and recognizing of cordiality, diplomacy. It gives consideration to the thoughts and feelings of others. And aloha reminds us to have compassion. So when we consider what exactly is the place of our language would determine everything that we do and everything that we don't do. Consider the power of aloha. Consider the power of our language. No laila e kia naina o ko e kipa mai nei. Ke la no ko mau manao ia o ko no keia manawa pokole ma kumuhina me kona manao.
Mahalo nui for joining us today on this episode of Free Hawaii News. It's been a pleasure to have you, and it's been a pleasure to have our guests as well. We want to thank them for the mana'o they shared.
No laila e kia naina a o ko e kipa mai nei. Mahalo anui ke i hui ana. A hui ho. Aloha.
We hope you enjoyed this month's episode of Free Hawaii News. Mahalo for watching. There's a new show every month, so this program will air several more times this month. You can view it anytime on Olelo's on-demand site or on YouTube. See you next time. Ahui ho. Aloha aina.
Free Hawaii Broadcasting Network.